My dear citizens of the world, I stand before you as a client. I depend on your generosity and patience, and I also feel a bit insecure because, as you just heard, our mission is building people's institutions, and Peter Mortimer is in the audience, who an hour ago said all institutions are evil. And dependency and insecurity are perhaps the two major features of a client. My focus, unfortunately, is on India and on poverty. The poor person in India is not even a client. He's a pre-client, or she is a pre-client. They depend on the moneylender, on the big farmer, on the teachers, who are the major moneylenders in the villages, on the president and secretaries of the cooperative societies, on government officials and local politicians. Fortunately, and very shortly, I will sit down as a citizen, free to avoid your questions. It's not so easy for the poor, the pre-client, to morph that fast. Thank you for inviting me. It means more to me than many of you perhaps are aware. And there are two reasons for this, being a bit personal. I worked for SIDA in India, of course, for about 4 years, and at that time, I happened to know a guy called Tim Broadhead, who was in India, somewhere around here. And ever since then, ever since I decided to go back, and I've taught development, funded it. I was in Washington for a little while too, in the world, in one of those notorious agencies you mentioned. I have been supported by SIDA whenever the people came up with a new idea, whenever a new institution emerged, like the self-help groups, or the community-managed resource centers, which we developed after we worked in an area for 7 to 10 years, or the microfinance institution with a social vision we set up in 1996. It was always SIDA who came there. So I'm really off to thank them, because MYRADA now is morphed into a group of institutions. We are about 25 institutions, companies, and societies. In fact, that iceberg that, that's been haunting me a bit, because that iceberg is what I use in MYRADA quite a lot. I say, MYRADA should be like an iceberg. We're an NGO. And remember, that iceberg dissolves, and maybe global warming will hurry that up, I don't know. We need to dissolve, we need to disappear, and the people are this water, really. We disappear into the water, and maybe morph into something next year when you have a winter of challenges. But I add something to that, because I'm not a Gandhian, and in my country you can't be. Development is a tough job. And I say, well, don't publicize. We hardly ever publicize. We never come to the press. And because the politicians are after us, everybody's after you. But then remember, I said, if the politician kicks you, they got to break their toe, because 7/8 of that iceberg is underneath. So it's very useful, this iceberg. I can morph from a client into a citizen rather easily. It's not so easy for the poor, and it's even more difficult for the poor in a traditional and diverse society as we have in India. It's tough. And why is it not so easy for the poor to become citizens in India? First, the present dominant socio-economic political system in India itself makes it difficult. The system broadly comprises 3 interrelated circles. I won't go in details, but the core comprises government, private sector staff, the armed forces, security personnel, all the doctors, lawyers, everybody you mentioned. They control resources. They allocate them on their terms, set the agenda. They abide or give the impression that they abide by all the rules of the game. However, I must be fair to them. If they are the leaders of this country, they've done something. If we consider the growth of our GDP in the last 40 years, we find the average income rising 468 times, while the consumer price index only rose 36 times. This implies that real purchasing power in the Indian economy has risen at least 13 times. The savings rate has increased from 8.6% in 1951 to 37.7% in 2008. And consumers are able to meet their basic needs by spending 30% of their income in 2008 to meet their basic needs, while in 1950 it was more like 90%. So there has been progress. I know I come from Karnataka, and when I tell my chief minister, there's no poverty in South Karnataka today. He says, no, because in India there's a competition today to be poor. Everybody wants to be poor. Everybody. Because you get benefits if you're poor. There's a competition. We made a big survey in India, the collector sent in details, and we found more people in Karnataka than there were citizens. Now, this is not true of the whole of India. Now, and what's happened has to be sustainable. There's a lot of other issues. There's local governance issues. There's the communities you talk about. But poverty as such, basic needs, big change. Then why on earth is this growth model a hurdle to the poor? Is it because growth is inadequate, not fast enough? Partly. But even if it was adequate, a greater part of the benefits have been and will be appropriated by this core. They have the power. I'm glad that word came out in one of the earlier talks. They have tangible and intangible assets, and they use them. And why? And what do they do with this? How is it that how do they use these tangible assets and their power to appropriate and to capture resources? One, through creating shortages of resources, either through capture or otherwise. Two, through imposing red tape, makes it very difficult. I had two people in a self-help group who were returning 25,000 rupees that day. So I said, why are you returning? They said, we borrowed this to put up a small mixing machine a month ago, and 25,000 is enough. But to get the electricity connection, we have to bribe another 25,000. So the project is not viable. And corruption. Because the core has provided poor and unstable governance and governments in many of the states in India, and therefore there's a big difference today. All right. The second circle around this core is created by the core for many reasons, especially the ones I mentioned earlier. This is what we call the gray circle. My economists hate them because they pay no taxes. They're not poor. You go to the market in India, you'll get a bamboo stick with 2 wire connections and a plug. You just go out and plug them onto the electric wire. You can start what you want, your engine. And this is very common. So you tap electricity, you do the same thing for water, pay low wages, the second circle, no direct taxes. They don't go to the bank because then you got to pay tax. Why the hell you go to the bank? But it employs millions of people and is more efficient than the core. If India has managed to survive the current recession, it is due to a large extent to this second circle, which manufactures every single branded product that you can think of at 1/3 or less the price. You want Philips shaving sets, you get it. Unfortunate part, of course, a lot of medicines also branded. And with wages in the core declining, this circle has had an increasing, expanding market, and we need to recognize this circle. The third circle comprises the poor, the left behind. How can they break through these barriers constructed by power relations and generated by the core is perhaps the question I might try to address in the rest of the paper. The second reason why the poor find it difficult to enter the other circles is because, and I'm just going to repeat what you said, the projects and schemes that we have designed for them focus only on provision of tangible physical assets that can be calculated, which once again are standardized. You see, everybody in India, if he gets 3 cows or she gets 3 cows, will rise above the poverty line. Everybody in India, if they get 20 sheep female sheep, and one ram will rise above the poverty line. Because somebody on the 30th floor has worked out how many they will produce, and et cetera, et cetera.